Chapter 4 Sweetly Broken. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and save those who are crushed in spirit. That's Psalms 34:18, January of 1978. I knew I couldn't go back to those early sheltered from the storm days, but I sure longed to. It'd been less than 2 years since my dad's homegoing. Random thoughts skipped through my pounding head as we waited for the ambulance. Lord, this baby was supposed to be a fresh start, one that would help us heal from the loss of my dad. Please let me be having a nightmare. Please let me just wake up. When the nurse came to tell us that the ambulance had arrived, I knew I wasn't dreaming. As soon as Jan was rolled into the emergency room, a flurry of activities began as she was immediately prepped for the catheterization. Pulling myself together, I knew I must call friends and ask them to pray. I searched through my coins and Mike checked his change for dimes as I walked to the payphone. Cell phones were practically unheard of back then. I dialed my friend Ginger's number first. Ironically, exactly 1 week before, at that same time, I'd called her to share the joy of Jan's birth. How could 1 week make such a difference? Next, I dialed our pastor's number. His wife answered. I told her what had happened. Honey, we'll be right there, she said. With all the snow and ice on the ground, it was an accomplishment for anyone to drive to Children's. It would have been uncomfortable if no, it would have been understandable if no one came, but many people did. Their joy and presence brought us strength. Jan survived that catheterization. We were told that she had a coarctation of the aorta. The doctors explained that it was a birth defect, a narrowing of the aorta. The survival rate for that type of surgery was very good. If all goes well, they said, Jan could be well enough to go home in a week. Finally, finally, we had some hope. Our pastor and his wife arrived just before Jan was whisked away. They prayed for her and for us, never leaving our sides, not even for our church's Sunday morning service. We were so exhausted mentally and physically, we would ask them time and time again, now what did the doctor say? We later learned that a layperson preached to the sparse crowd that had braved the icy roads that morning at our church service, so that our pastor, Jack Poe, could stay with us. When church was over, more friends filled the corridor of the hospital. They prayed and waited with us in our waiting room. Our assigned waiting room was a long corridor with a huge sheet of plastic covered the opening where the new waiting room would soon be. The hospital was in the middle of remodeling. The soon to be waiting room didn't have the windows in place yet. As the winter storm raged outside, it blasted again and again against the wall of plastic that served as our temporary windows. The plastic shook and rattled, making the sounds of a flag being whipped in the wind, and the bone chilling gusts forced their way through the weakest spots in the plastic. I pulled my wool camel colored coat tightly around my shivering body, and I pulled the hood up too. The icy cold and bleakness that permeated the wall matched what was in my heart and my body. The minutes clicked by 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, and finally, after 4 hours, the surgery was complete. Once again, Jan had survived, however, not without problems. She'd stopped breathing in the midst of the surgery and went without oxygen for a period of 15 minutes. They had to resuscitate her. The doctors hoped that she would be all right. We later learned in those 15 minutes, our normal little New Year's baby was lost forever. The day had turned into night before the nurse said, Mr. and Miss Whitley, your baby's out of recovery now. You can see her, but only for 10 minutes, no more than 2 people at a time. Mike and I hurriedly walked down the long corridor to the ICU area. We didn't know what to expect. We paused momentarily at those double doors. We each took a deep breath before we walked in. Our hearts were not prepared for what we saw. Our panicked baby girl frantically fought the various attachments to her body. Surely this can't be Jan. She barely resembled the baby I'd cradled in my arms less than 24 hours earlier. A respirator tube was taped to her upper lip, and she moved her head distraughtly from side to side as if trying to escape the PICC line. And that line jutted from the side of her tiny neck where the IV and medications were given. Then there was a drainage tube that protruded out of her lungs. The surgical incision was across her back, and tape covered much of that little body of hers. There were no cell phone cameras back then, but I'm kind of glad that I have no pictures to preserve that sight that is forever etched into my heart. One of her tiny legs had begun to turn dark purple and swelled where the medication had been pumped rapidly in when she stopped breathing. The actual injection site was black. The meds to resuscitate her had literally burned her skin. She couldn't cry or make a sound because of the respirator. More connections were fastened to her chest to monitor her heart rate. We weren't allowed to touch her because it might interfere with the machines. How I longed to hold her in my arms and tell her it would be all right. But would I ever get to hold her again, or feed her, or hear her cry? Would it be all right? That night, Mike and I drove home on icy roads to spend time with Ben and to get some rest. Oklahomans are not accustomed to driving on ice. As we attempted to turn into our housing addition, our car just led right on down the main street. It took us a while to navigate our way back to our own street, but we did eventually make it safely home. I hadn't recovered from the delivery and still was experiencing those intense migraines. Those icy roads only compounded our heartbreak and our pain. Ben was excited to see us. He ran to us and we hugged him tightly. Poor little guy. He'd been so excited over having a baby sister. And at almost 5, he certainly didn't understand what had happened. Not that Mike and I did either. My sweet mom had prepared dinner for us. As we sat down to eat, I looked up and saw Jan's picture on the snack bar, the standing one the hospital took the day Jan was born. Immediately, the picture flashed into my mind of how Jan now looked, her little body dependent on all the life support systems. I collapsed into tears. Was it only a week ago we'd celebrated her birth? God's grace, keeping pace. Our pastor and his wife, Jack and Phyllis, were an integral part of pointing us continually toward God and his word, as were the members of our church. They supported us and poured their love up on us when we needed it the most. Let's keep looking for his glimpses of grace, because I can testify to the fact they are always there. We may miss them. I missed them many times, but they were always there. Thank you. End of chapter. I think that was chapter 4. Thank you.